How you doing, everybody? I'm Ken Bykoff, and welcome to the Peegs podcast. Something a little bit different this week. Not only do you have it, our regular subscribers are hearing the audio of the podcast, but we're also running this in video form online that you guys are going to have to check out as well. Joining me today with some reaction about last week's episode and the how it happened when night fell is Amanda Pavelka, co-producer and somebody who's going to be helping along with me on a bunch of the how it happened going forward. Amanda, how you doing?
Great. How are you, Ken?
I'm doing good, and I'm very excited. It seemed like we had a good response to the night piece. It was something that you and I started talking about months ago, well before COVID hit, and it was something that we were able to pull together. Before we get into the reaction on that, though, I wanted to talk to you just about the possibility. We're recording this on Tuesday night. There's a possibility that, and it seems like a good possibility, that the Big Ten may be playing football in the fall after all. All the details have not certainly yet been worked out. There hasn't been an official announcement yet. There's just a ton of rumors. But your thoughts on just that very possibility?
It's been an emotional roller coaster, but if college football can safely play, I am all for it.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how they're able to do it. You know, look, the NFL's been able to do it they haven't had starts and stops in the NFL. Some other college conferences have had some teams that have had some problems. There's been some pauses. You know, hell, Indiana's program has had starts and stops with basketball and some other sports having to pause workouts and things like that. But certainly, look, 2020 was supposed to be an exciting year for IU football. Michael Penix and Stevie Scott and, you know, a bunch of defensive players coming back. Tom Allen's team looks poised to enjoy a good year. If they could do it safely, I don't know how they're going to be able to do it, but if they could do it safely and make it so that guys are able to avoid any kind of long-term problems, which I know is what the Big Ten has been focused on here. They're going to do what they can. There's a lot of money on the line. There's a lot of jobs on the line in terms of athletic departments and revenue and things like that. I tend to personally err on the side of safety over revenue. Money isn't everything. What has changed in terms of long-term, what we know about COVID hasn't changed at all because it can't. But some of the testing things have seemed to have at least improved a little bit over the past 5 weeks or whatever it's been since they canceled the fall sports. You know, if they are able to come back and play, what are you most excited about for the IU football season?
A healthy Michael Penix and a grown-up defense.
Yeah, defense is everything to me. I've always been a defensive guy. Penix, I think, has a chance to be a special player. So does Whop Philyor, Stevie Scott. There's some excitement there, but it's defense is everything. And one of the reasons, you know, Indiana's had great offense, not good offenses, great offenses in the past, especially with Antoine Randall during some of those Kevin Wilson years. Just a ton of points being put up. But if you can't stop anybody, you don't even have to be a good defense. You could be an average defense and be successful. And Indiana hasn't always had an average defense. Over the past several seasons under Tom Allen, when he first got here as a defensive coordinator, and over the first couple of years of his tenure, Indiana's defense has been at the very least good. Not necessarily always great, but good, a little bit better than average. And so I think that that certainly is something that Indiana fans can look forward to. We'll just have to wait to see if it comes out again. All signs seem to point to something good, but we'll see if it actually comes out. Now, our podcast with Bob Knight, the 20th anniversary of the Bob Knight firing, on last week's Peegs podcast presents How It Happened When Night Fell. Again, was something that Amanda and I have been talking about for a long time. During the summer, the plan was to talk to everybody that we talked to in person as best that we could. COVID hit, and that became something that wasn't as possible. And she kept saying, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this, let's get it done. I kept pushing it off, hoping we would get an opportunity to actually talk to people for it, especially, you know, the guys that I know in the media. When football rolls around, hey, you get a chance to stand there. Audio quality is going to be better if you're there with the microphone. I pushed it off. Obviously, weren't able to talk to people in person, but we were able to talk to some key media guys that covered it. My regret is Terry Hutchens was not available to speak to since he passed away. I would say not available. What a terrible way to put that, Ken. That, he passed away a few years back, and he's missed. And I would have loved to have had his voice with that, especially because he was also somebody who knew Mike Davis very well. And I thought his perspective would have been great. But it was interesting. We had players that were thrilled to talk to us. AJ Moye certainly was excited to talk to us, just to spill out his love that he had for Bob Knight. Jared Jeffries was more than willing to talk to us. Kirk Haston was excited to talk to us. Some players politely declined, and that was something that I expected. Mike Davis politely declined. Some people with the IU administration politely declined. Everybody was like, you know what? No, we don't want to revisit that. We're no, thank you. And everybody was really great about it. But I understood why. And that seems like a normal response. I fully expected that to be the case. And I know, Amanda, you got a chance to talk to Jeff Newton, who didn't make it into the piece, but kind of what were his thoughts on the firing and how it all went down?
Jeff was there when the incident happened. He didn't think anything of it, just that Bob Knight had grabbed a kid's shoulder and that he wanted to teach him a lesson in respect. He saw absolutely nothing wrong with what had happened. And so whenever the players were invited to Bob Knight's house, he was just absolutely shocked. Nobody had ever asked him what happened with the incident. He was just a freshman. And for all of this to happen within the first month or so of him being a student at IU was just absolutely shocking.
Oh, the players had lost their rudder. I mean, this was the reason that they were there. Mike Davis recruited a bunch of those guys. Everybody says it was Bob Knight's team. Davis recruited a bunch of those guys. And there's a bunch of guys that were on that team that played in the Final Four, that were key members of the Final Four, that they had barely practiced with Coach Knight, let alone played for him. So it was, it wasn't Knight's team that Davis coached. Davis recruited a bunch of those guys and had 2 years with them. But to me, it was kind of the perfect blend of the older guys who had Knight's fundamentals and were able to lead things through that first tumultuous year, and then into that second year when they tied for a Big Ten title and went to the Final Four. It was that blend. But I do think it was just really interesting to talk to these guys and hear the love that they had for Coach Knight and why they were there. And, so many guys talked about transferring. I know Dane Fife was real open about it. I went back and found the coverage of the time where he announces to a group of reporters that, hey, I'm leaving, I'm done here. And I wanted to play something that didn't make it into the piece, but it's something that Kirk Haston talked about, and the players transferring or talking about transferring him, and him talking to Dane, and Dane now then giving him grief after leaving the next year. Go ahead and check out the clip. I'll play it here, and we'll be back in a second.
I remember driving over to his apartment and talking with him a few different times, and just and kind of giving my recruitment speech, and then he likes to throw. We play golf. We play golf once a year maybe, but we see each other a couple times at events, and he always without question, always gives me a hard time about the next year. Like, yeah, I stayed for you, but you wouldn't stay. And so I've had to deal with that for 18 or 19 years. But yeah, that Dane was pretty hot about it. And I think, I told him, I was like, Dane, you can't be mad at me for convincing you to stay. It worked out pretty good for you. I mean, you had a pretty good IU career that senior year, added to your legacy, and look what you're doing now. So don't come at me with that. I think it worked out well for you.
Now, Amanda, that's obviously interesting with Fife and Haston, and how Haston in the piece talked about him regretting coming out when he was the number 16 overall pick in the draft. Jeff Newton talked about leaving a little bit too, as well, right?
He said that it was mainly the seniors. of course, him being there just for a short period of time. I mean, imagine that. The thought of transferring definitely crossed everyone's mind. But he talked about a lot about Dane Five and the seniors, saying that if Coach Davis was not going to replace Knight, that they would all leave. He was not in on that demand.
It was a volatile situation. You mentioned the players not being spoken to about it. That was something else that I know that is something I had heard over the years. That, you know, look, the administration made this decision without talking to the players, without asking the people who were there what happened. Now, I mean, Coach Knight, you know, to be honest, Coach Knight did not help himself, I think, with the weird little press conference that he held with Mike Davis, using Mike Davis as a proxy for Kent Harvey to show what happened and all that. That might not have been the smartest thing on Coach Knight's part, but certainly he wanted to get ahead of the story. And the thing that has really stood out over the years for me, as somebody who was covering the team at the time at Basketball News, a national magazine that no longer exists, sadly. But Terry Hutchens was actually my Big Ten correspondent at the time. I'm an IU alum. I obviously was watching the situation closely. Nobody handled the situation well at all. You know, I asked all the players. I asked the media guys what could have been done better. And what has always struck me is Coach Knight and his actions were not great. The administration and what they did was nobody's hands were clean on this thing. You know, to me, Knight should have gone ahead in May and said, you know, if we're going to do this, we're going to play this game, I'm out. I'm not doing this. You know, but I know why I understand why he wanted to hold on. The interesting thing to me is my perspective on this thing has changed over the years, to where I was far more angry at Indiana when they fired Knight for how they fired Knight when it happened than I am now. I'm 20 years older. I have more perspective. I'm farther away from the situation. But Indiana did not react well. Bob Knight didn't react well. Your bosses are telling you, stay in town. We need to talk about this. And you go fishing in Canada. That was, you know, look, you could only do that so often with your bosses. And I know Knight figured that he wasn't going to change their minds. I get it. But if you really want to put the nail in the coffin, that's what you do. You go ahead and you ignore your bosses. And, you know, to me, as time has gone on, nobody's hands were clean. And I hope that's what people took away from this. And that's kind of what triggered me even thinking about doing all of this as the 20th anniversary came up, because I know my perspective changed. And Amanda, it was interesting to hear the players talk about how their perspectives have changed as well.
I think it'll be interesting when we can talk to all of the players. I think that those who chose not to spoke with us or weren't comfortable have something maybe to say too. I'll be interested to hear that. I think that they already had their minds made up whenever they fired him. I mean, he knew it too.
In the first opportunity, they were going to go ahead and pull the trigger and fire him. I also think it's interesting that how somewhat, I don't want to say protective players are of Coach Knight, but they are. I think that they're suspect when it comes to dealing with some media. You have somebody like me getting a hold of guys. I made it very clear up front that I was not there to reopen old wounds and do all that, because that's really what I did. I did not want to do that. I was there to kind of think about how perspectives have changed, how people have looked at the situation different, hear what happened, but also how their attitudes have changed. Because look, you know, Jared Jeffries was 18 years old. You know, AJ Moyer is 18, 19 years old. I mean, and now that's half a lifetime ago for those guys. And they've seen a lot over the years since then. You know, those perspectives are going to change. And that's why I wanted to present this again, and why we wanted to present it again, was just to be able to give people that perspective. Certainly, though, I didn't get the hate mail I thought I was going to get, but there definitely were people who just don't want to talk about this and don't want to relive it in any way, shape, or form.
I think that everyone I've talked to who has went into it with an open mind has appreciated the podcast.
It has been great to see the response that we've had, and this is just the start of these too. These kind of audio documentaries. I'm excited about it. We have some topics that we're going to be looking at in the future. Not such things. Some ideas that we've kicked around include and I don't. Nobody else is doing this kind of stuff. Terry Hepner's passing is one of them. I'd like to look back at Antoine Randall's 2001 season. I think would be really, really interesting. And the interesting thing, Amanda, is just I could go ahead and take Indiana athletics and narrow it down to literally basically the last 30, 35 years. And the number of stories that and things that have happened over the years, whether it be Kelvin Sampson or the couple of days that Dan Dockish was head coach, or just the Final Four that Knight had against Duke, where Ted Valentine went ahead and worked his magic on Indiana. Hell, I could do a whole episode, I'm sure, on the time that Ted Valentine called a technical and threw Bob Knight out of a game because he went out on the floor to check on Luke Recker, who was down with a rib injury, and he threw him out of the game, and the place went nuts. That's Tom Crean's first year. All of these guys, there's a lot to go over with all these, and I'm certainly excited about being able to put together these podcasts.
Just talking to the players after the fact, I feel like I hear something new every time I talk to somebody about these subjects. So I'm excited.
Now, being able to see Bob Knight come back in February, I know that was something that I wasn't sure I was ever going to see. As time went on, I repeatedly wrote in Inside Indiana magazine and things like that Bob Knight was becoming an old bitter guy who couldn't let it go. Indiana had turned the page on the thing and had invited him back and put him in their Hall of Fame, and was reaching out. The people who were involved in that firing weren't there anymore. And at that point, he wasn't hurting anybody outside of himself. And his family wanted him to be there. His players wanted to be there. I was there when the 75-76 team had their reunion, and they wanted Coach Knight there, and he wasn't there. The Hoosier Hysterics podcast, that event they did at the Bluebird last November, you were there too, Amanda. You could feel the excitement in the room when Coach Knight was announced. We knew that he was on his way. We hoped that it would work out, but we didn't know for sure until we actually saw him walk in the door that he was going to be there. Just tell people about that day and how that may have led to him ending up at Assembly Hall in February.
So I had heard rumors, but it was that he was going to arrive at 3:30, and 3:30 came around and he wasn't there. I figured it was just a rumor. I'm not sure what time it was, but Erica Ward hopped off the stage, and I think it was Eric that just welcomed Coach on the stage. He just all of a sudden I don't even know. It's honestly a blur. But all of a sudden, Bob Knight's walking up the stairs at the Bluebird onto the stage. I was completely shocked. I looked back at Jeff Rabjohns, and he seemed to know that it was happening. But whenever I asked Jeff, I said, "Is Bob Knight coming at 3:30?" And he said, "No." So I don't know. I trusted Rabbi, and just for him to make a return in front of how many fans? 600 people. 600.
Yeah, there were a lot of people there. Yeah. Here's the thing. It is And was that the, for me, that was interesting for me because they said he's coming unless there's a last minute thing, he's going to be here. So I was kind of in the side part with Derek Elston and Sage Steele was over there, a couple of other people, Tire Bus. And I saw Knight walk in with Dr. Rink and Bob Hamill. And it was toward the end of the IU football game. And as the co-host of the post-game call-in show, I knew I had to leave very soon. So he goes on stage and, it was very clear that they did not want Coach to be up there any longer than they didn't want to force him to stay up there or make him uncomfortable. And Knight just kept talking and was getting into it and was clearly feeding off the crowd.
He grabbed that microphone countless times.
Yeah. No, he was loving it up there. And I know that, that meant a lot to him, and it made him realize, and Rab Johns talked about this in the piece, that he realized that the love was still there for him. So when there started to be these rumors about him coming to Assembly Hall and being able to do it, it was just interesting, and you could hear the buzz, and Purdue's coming, and then we go to the game. And it's a different atmosphere, not from just the people, but from with the operations people. Things were different. Everybody was horse racing term on the muscle. Everybody was tense and making things were different that day than they normally were. The game, I know Indiana got beat by Purdue. I couldn't tell you a single thing that happened in the second half of that basketball game. Not a single thing, because I was busy dealing with the night stuff and trying to put things together. And just the fact of seeing him on the court and the love that people had for him and basking in it, I think it was so good and so helpful and so cathartic for the fans, for Coach Knight, for the players, for everybody. That ended up making it a special night. That did not have to be 19 years, almost 20 years in the making. That could have happened 10 years ago. But that doesn't make a difference because it did happen. It finally happened. And now, it just changes everything for everybody. And when we're talking to the players, it's clear that they feel that way as well.
Looking back on that day, I did not think that was going to happen. I did not believe that Bob Knight would step onto the court at Assembly Hall until he walked out there.
Oh, yeah. Until you come up the tunnel. Yeah, I agree.
They said he was in Cook Hall watching the game with his former players. I was not believing that until he stepped foot out in front of fans at Assembly Hall.
And from what I understand, it was once he was there, he didn't necessarily want to take those extra couple of steps and go out on the court. And, there's a hallway there and all that. So it's more than a couple of extra steps. And Coach Knight obviously isn't in the same physical condition he was, once upon a time. But just the fact that he was there and was able to bask in the warmth. I wasn't bothered at all that he didn't talk to any of us, that he didn't talk to the media. That's not about the media and everything that goes. That to me was for the players and the fans, and that event being pulled off, I think is just really important for the program. And that really made me think more about this project that was going to be one of our subjects, because time changes perspectives and it gets people to realize what's important. And Coach Knight and his players certainly felt it coming together in a way that had been missing.
I think as we talk to these former players about certain subjects, they'll be much more open with us. We'll learn a lot of things we wouldn't have.
Well, I'm certainly excited about some of the projects that we have coming up. We're going to cover football. We're going to cover basketball. We're going to cover some baseball along the way, because I would love to do an episode just about the impact of Kauffman Field being a place. And it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to the two of us putting these together. And this podcast about Coach Knight, I mean, it's just the beginning. I mean, look, Amanda and I will be presenting all kinds of episodes of how it happened, and we're going to be looking at some of the biggest names in IU history. coaches, players, seasons, events. I mean, there's going to be a little bit of everything. We'll look back and examine the way perspectives have changed on what has happened. Now, we want to hear from you too, as listeners and, as eventually viewers with these kind of things. Email us at peegspodcast@gmail.com. Follow us at the Peegs Podcast. That's the little @ symbol at the Peegs Podcast on Twitter with your suggestions. We love to hear from you. What subject do you really look forward to taking a look at going forward?
I think that the first big event that I can remember is Kelvin Sampson getting fired. So I think that team, specifically guys like DJ White, that I really look forward to talking to, that transition from Kelvin Sampson to Tom Crean. Kind of the same thing with Bob Knight to Mike Davis, except for he was already an assistant. Just that transition. I just remember that our season tickets were all of a sudden boosted way, way to the front. Lost a lot of fans in that time, and it was rough. It was a rough time for IU. So I think just what happened with Kelvin Sampson and how that situation might be treated now, and what the former players have to say about that.
Well, for those who aren't watching this, who are just listening to this, if you watch it, you know it. But Amanda's 25 years old, so she's learning along the way, and you have to be enjoying being able to learn some of this stuff as well. I can tell you that the transition from Tom Crean to Archie Miller was the first smooth transition of coaching that Indiana had since the 1930s, which sounds insane, and yet. Even at that, Everett Dean was the coach of IU in the 1930s, late 20s, early 30s. They transitioned to Branch McCracken. McCracken was there until until the early 60s, rather. Now, Lou Watson, the next coach, he had to replace a legend in Branch McCracken. At the end of Lou Watson's tenure, there was, rumored boycotts from players because they didn't like Lou Watson. And so there was some turmoil there, and they bring in Bob Knight. Knight obviously had plenty of turmoil when he left. We just did an hour on that very thing 20 years after it happened. So Knight gets fired. You have Mike Davis. The Davis thing was pure turmoil the whole time. They fire him, or he resigned. I'm sorry, he resigned. And they bring in Kelvin Sampson. People didn't like Kelvin Sampson right from the start. That was not a smooth transition at all because of the baggage he brought along with him. So then Sampson gets fired in the span of a couple of years. You have an interim in Dan Dockich. They bring in Tom Crean. The entire program is wiped out, and you have to start out fresh. 9 years later, you have the first smooth transition of IU basketball coaching since literally the 1930s. And when you think about something like that, you think about just the kind of time that's involved in there. It is these kind of things happen all the time at Indiana at an alarming rate. Football hasn't always been very smooth when it comes to making transitions there. Again, all subjects that we're going to have a chance to cover on the How It Happened series. Amanda, thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to working with you with more projects in the future.
Thank you, Ken. I'm excited.
Well, that's all the time we have on the Peegs podcast this week. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to remind you to visit Peegs.com for the very best in IU football and basketball coverage you're going to find anywhere. Nobody covers Hoosier recruiting better than Mike Pegram, Jeff Rabjohns, and Matt Weaver, so come be a part of a thriving and exciting community at Peegs.com. Folks, you are not going to be disappointed. Folks, we're out of time, but for now, and for Mike, Jeff, and Matt, and Amanda, thanks for listening, everybody.